Algebra 1, Ratios, Rates, and Conversions. In this concept, we're going to start by looking at ratios, rates, and then converting those rates from one unit to another. So let's start with some vocabulary definitions and formulas. Remember, when you watch the video, you'll probably need to pause at times so you can have time to write down the definition. So just go ahead and do that. Now let's start with the definition of a ratio. In math, a ratio is a comparison of two numbers by division. So you'll often see it written as a fraction. And that comparison shows the relative size of those two values. An example I have for you is the ratio 1 to 3. And notice that you can write it with a colon, and if you heard how I read it, I said 2, so 1 to 3. And then we could just put that in a context so that one boy for every 3 girls, let's say, in a class. Another way to say that same comparison is with division or as a fraction. So 1 to 3, or you can read that as 1/3. A second definition is a rate. A rate is a type of ratio, and it's a comparison of two values with different units. We think of rates all the time, especially with speed. So an example would be 70 miles in 2 hours. A unit rate is when you simplify a rate. And so it's a simplified rate where the second value is divided down to 1. So I used the rate example that I just gave you, 70 miles in 2 hours, and I reduced it down to what we call a unit rate, 35 miles in 1 hour. So notice that the second unit is in terms of 1. So when you're asked to give a unit rate, you divide your rate all the way down so that the bottom number is 1. Now finally, when we do some conversions, we're going to need to have a conversion factor. That is a multiplier that changes one set of units to another. So this should say one set of units to another. Now let's do some examples together that will help you understand all these concepts and definitions. So first we're going to start with that first definition, a ratio. And we're going to express the following ratio as a fraction reduced to lowest terms. So you'll probably remember reducing fractions in your earlier math classes. 35 to 50. So we're going to write that as a fraction. So the first number is our numerator. Our second number is our denominator. Then to reduce a fraction to lowest terms, we think about a number that will divide both into the top and the bottom. So I can divide 35 by 5, and I can also divide 50 by 5. So this ratio in lowest terms is 7/10, or 7 to 10. Now 200 to 14. Sometimes you will have a bigger number as your numerator, and that's okay. So then we can just do what we did on number 1. We think of a common factor for both of them. Well, they both can be divided by 2. So this will reduce to 100/7, or the ratio 100 to 7. And then finally, 12 to 14 boys to girls in a class. So our first number is our numerator. We're comparing those values by division, and then if we reduce, we can divide both by 2. And so 12 divided by 2 is 6, 14 divided by 2 is 7. So for every 6 boys, there are 7 girls in the class, or 6/7. Now we're going to move to rates. So remember, with your definitions, you can look back up at that definition. Your rate compares two numbers with different units. So number 4, we've got $256 for 6 hours to rent a boat. So our first number is our numerator, 256 for 6 hours. And then we're going to reduce that to lowest terms. So I just think of a common divider. They can each be divided by 2. So 256 divided by 2 is $128 for 3 hours to rent a boat. Number 5, 50 miles every 15 minutes. So written as a rate, we have 15 miles per or over 15 minutes. And then we just think of a common divisor. We can divide both of those by 5. So we'll have 10 miles every 3 minutes. So notice in these two we're comparing numbers that have different units, miles per minute, dollars per hours, whereas the examples just above we are comparing just numbers or numbers that are the same thing. Like a number 3, we had just people in the class, so they weren't different units that we were comparing. Let's keep moving forward with examples of our definitions and concepts from above, and let's look at some examples of unit rates. So remember, a unit rate, it's a simplified rate where the second value is divided all the way down to 1. So we have 140 miles in 2 hours. So written as a rate, 140 is our numerator every 2 hours. And then we're going to divide that. We can divide them both by 2. So 70 miles in 1 hour. Now usually in math, when we have 1 as our denominator, we don't need to write that because anything divided by 1 is just itself. So we'll have 70 miles in 1 hour. Now with number 7, $3.79 per 16 ounces. And this happens a lot when you go shopping and you're buying things. And so oftentimes we want to know, well, what is the price per unit? In this case is ounce. And then when we look at it, that's a specialized unit rate called a unit price. Often when you go to the grocery store, if you look at the tag that's on the shelf in front of the item, it will tell you the unit price. So we'll have $3.79 over 16, and then I'm going to use OZ, that is the abbreviation for ounces. Now what you'll need to do is get your calculator, and you'll take 3.79 and divide it by 16. When we're talking money, we always round, not always, but if we're not told otherwise, we're going to round to the nearest cent. So cent is our second decimal place. So you'll see that $3.79 divided by 16 is 0.24. And that's dollars per, and that is 1 ounce, but I'm not going to write my 1 because I don't need to. So I'll just write my ounces, and I have my unit price in fraction form. So it's 24 cents per ounce. A really useful thing in math is conversions. So converting one unit to another or one rate to another. So to do that, we need to first figure out a conversion factor, and remember from your definition that that's a multiplier that will take our original unit and change it to the desired unit. So I've given you some common conversion factors, and then you can use these when you do your Math Excel practice for this concept. So remember, have your notes out so you can look back and see these conversion factors. So one common conversion is to go from pounds to ounces. And so the way that you have a conversion factor is you just compare numerator and denominator one unit to the next. So notice I have pounds compared to ounces. And then you simply put the corresponding number. So for each 1 pound, there are 16 ounces. We could write this a different way. We could write the conversion factor with ounces compared to pounds. And so we just do the same thing. We would say, have our ounces as our numerator, pounds as our denominator, and then just put the corresponding amounts. So 16 ounces for 1 pound. Another common conversion is yards to feet. And so for each 1 yard, there's 3 feet. Now, inches to centimeters, because it's not an even number, we will express that as in decimal form. So for each 1 inch, it's approximately equal to, that's what that symbol means, the wavy equation sign, 2.54 centimeters. If we wrote that as a ratio, we would put one rate, or a rate is what I should say, over 2.54 centimeters. And then finally, feet to inches, so 1 foot for every 12 inches. Now the way that you pick a conversion factor is you look at the unit that you have and compare it to the one that you want to convert to. So we want to go from ounces to pounds. Right now we have 8.2 ounces, and I'm going to go ahead and include. So what I need is a conversion factor that is going to introduce pounds in my numerator. And I need to compare that to ounces. So my ounces are going to be in my denominator. Now I know up above that for each 1 pound there are 16 ounces. Now I can rewrite my 8.2 as a fraction. And then you just use the skill that you have to multiply fractions across. So you go straight across, you have 8.2, and then 1 times 16 is 16. Now look at your units. So any numerator can divide out with any denominator. And since that's the case, that means these ounces in our numerator will divide out with the ounces in our denominator. And we're simply left with pounds, which is what we wanted. We wanted to convert to pounds. Now I'm going to go ahead and divide that on my calculator, and that will be 0.5125, or about half a pound, just a little bit over half a pound. Yards to feet, so we can use that same method. So I'm going to write what I have, and then I need a conversion factor that's going to introduce feet and going to divide away my yards. And then I just place the numbers. So I start with the units first and then place the numbers. So for each 1 foot, for each 1 yard, I have 3 feet. Now I'm going to focus on my numbers, so I just multiply straight across. So I have 84 over 1. And now I'm going to look at my units. So my yards in my numerator will divide out with my yards in my denominator, and I'm simply left with feet, and I can just rewrite that as 84 feet. Last one is we want to convert centimeters to inches. So I want a factor that's going to introduce inches and divide out my centimeters. So for each 1 inch, I have 2.54 centimeters. So again, focusing on numbers, 75 times 1 is 75. 1 times 2.54. And then look at your units. So your centimeters divided by centimeters, those divide out. Anything divided by itself is simply 1, and you're left with inches. Now go ahead and divide, because we don't want to mix and have a decimal within a fraction. So 75 divided by 2.54 is approximately 29.5. And then put your label on, because we're really focusing on our units, so 29.5 inches. The last thing we'll look at is dimensional or unit analysis. So go back up to your vocabulary and definitions, because we skipped that one. I wanted to cover it when we actually did some examples. You can fill in your definitions. So dimensional or unit analysis is a technique to convert one unit to another. And now let's go back and let's work some examples. So when we are converting one unit, and in particular we're going to look at a rate. So remember, rates have 2 units involved. And we want to convert one rate to another unit. We're going to use this dimensional analysis. So it's similar to what we just did. We're going to use conversion factors, but we may use more than one. So the first thing is you write your original rate. Then you multiply by conversion factors that convert the original units to the desired units. You write them in a way that puts the new units where they need to go. So you think about numerator and denominator, and you want to divide out the original units. And then finally you multiply the numbers, numerators and denominators, you divide out any common units, and then the units that remain will be your new desired ones. So let's just jump in and do an example, and hopefully this will become clear to you. So we want to have a car that's traveling 60 miles per hour and want to know what is the car's speed in feet per second. So notice that we need to do two conversions. So we need to go from miles to feet and then hours to seconds. So we need feet and miles. I'm going to give you this conversion factor. So for each 1 mile, there are 5,000, and you may have known this, 280 feet. Lots of people know that fact. And now we need to go from hours to seconds. So hours to seconds. In 1 hour, there are 60 times 60, or 3,600 seconds. So these are the two, sorry, that's my dog, conversion factors that we'll use. So you start by writing the original rate, which is 60 miles per hour. And then you're going to multiply it by both of the conversion factors that you need. So the feet to second and the hours to second. So actually, sorry, that would be feet to miles. Let me change that. So first let's just focus on the numbers. So you multiply straight across when you're multiplying fractions. 60 times 5,280 times 1 will get you 316,800. And then in your denominator, it's just 1. I didn't write the ones, times 3,600. So 3,600. Now focus on your units. So I'll start up here in the upper left. Notice you have miles. And so your miles are going to divide out, because you have 1 in the numerator and 1 in the denominator. Anything divided by itself is just 1, so divide down to 1. Then look down below. You have an hour here and then an hour up in this numerator. Those will divide out. And what should be left are the units that are your desired ones, your new ones, and that's the case. Feet per second. Now we're going to go ahead and divide that down to a unit rate. So remember that's down to where our denominator is 1. So to do that, grab your calculator, divide the top by the bottom, and you'll get 88 feet per second. Now let's look at number 12. Your bathroom sink is dripping at a rate of 8 fluid ounces per minute. What is the speed of the drip in gallons per hour? So the two conversion factors that you need to convert ounces to gallons. So I've given you that. For each 1 gallon, it's 128 ounces. And then we need to convert minutes to hours. So for 60 minutes, we've got 1 hour. So those are our two conversion factors. And then I went ahead and set up the problem. So I started by writing our original rate. So that's ounces. And remember, that is OZ, and I cross my Z's. So 8 ounces per 1 minute. And then I want to multiply it by my two conversion factors. So that will convert my ounces to gallons and my minutes to hours. First, let's focus on our numbers. Multiply straight across. 8 times 1 times 60 is 480. 1 times 128 times 1 is 128. Now, look at your units. Let's start with ounces. So I have ounces in a numerator and denominator, so they'll divide out. I look at my minutes. I have a minute in denominator, minute in numerator, and so what I should have left are my new desired units, which I do, gallons per hour. Then let's divide that down so we have a unit rate. 480 divided by 128 is 3 3/4 or 0.75 gallons each hour. Ooh, that's quite a fast drip. Number 13 is a lot like number 11. So the average speed of a Tour de France pro cyclist is 27 miles per hour. What is that speed in feet per second? They are moving. So we need to take miles to feet and then hours to seconds. So we're going to use those same conversion factors that we did in number 11, and I have those written for you. Then we're going to use our method, which is first start by writing your original rate, which is our 27 miles in 1 hour, multiply it by your conversion factors, and then do the math. So we'll multiply straight across. 27 times 5,280 will give us 142,560. And then in our denominator, 1 times 3,600 is just that. Let's look at our units. So start in the upper left. Notice our miles will divide out with mile, and it doesn't matter that one's plural and one's singular, it's just the unit. And then look at our hours. Our hours should divide out, and we should be left with our desired unit, so that's feet per second, which we are. And then we'll take that down to a unit rate by dividing, and 39.6 feet every second.